Hi, my name is Winnie. Welcome to my life's journey. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing. Thank you for your support this far. And if you're new here, karibu sana. As usual, here we share about real life issues that affect you and me. Hopefully, so far you've been able to be edified and you've been able to be impacted by the things I share here. And today I want to share something different, a bit slightly different. I want to share about my own story. So I can't tell you, friends, how long it has taken me to share this on this channel and how hard this has been, just to share, because my reason for sharing is not to paint anyone as a bad person or to show that I had the worst family in the world, but basically to just share my story the way I know how to. Hopefully it will impact someone out there, it will edify you on an individual basis, on a personal level, and that you will be able to own your own story. So my mother got me when she was in campus, and she had to take me to my grandmother at only 2 months old. And of course, I had to be raised in the rural part of Kenya, and it was not easy. There were so many things that I had to go through because I was not just being raised alone. There were also other cousins of mine whose parents had also brought them to be raised by my grandmother. So of course, that could only tell you that that was a perfect disaster for a dysfunctional family. And unfortunately, it was a time when my grandmother and my grandfather were not living, a rich life. So of course they had been rich at some point, but all that was gone, and now we were living in utter poverty, and life was not easy, friends. If I begin to tell you the things we had to go through as children, sometimes I think it's someone else's story. But raised by my grandmother in the rural parts, and it was not easy. We had to go through a lot of, challenges, and poverty was one of them. My grandmother was not working at the time. My grandfather was also not, actually my grandmother has never worked. My grandfather was not working at the time, and we had to go without food for so long. In fact, I can't begin to tell you how, triggering this video is, just sharing this story, but I promised myself that I'll go through with it, and I just hope it will. We really struggled. I struggled on a personal level. I hated the life I lived, as a child, because, going to school, sometimes you'd see, obviously I was also in a school in the rural areas, but we had people who were rich. So just looking at what they had and we did not have. I remember I had a best friend in primary school, and her name was Priscilla. Priscilla would come with spaghetti. I'd never even seen spaghetti in my life. And Priscilla would share the spaghetti with me and just say, this is, and she would, kind of educate me on what it was. And it was horrible. Instead of appreciating that she was my friend, I just hated it. I hated, and I became angry at the fact that we didn't have, much as a family. And of course, part of the things that we faced was also, that I faced was also emotional neglect. Sometimes, the way you just have big emotions as a child, and you wanted to share with someone, there was no one to share your emotions with, so you just had to deal with your emotions. There's nothing as bad as just having to, lock up your emotions and keep quiet as if they never mattered. So that is exactly what happened to me. And the other thing I had to deal with was an environment where I had an uncle who was at the time abusing substance, and sometimes he would come home and force you to carry something for him to go and sell, and I would go with him where people were drinking, and it was very traumatizing just seeing where people are drinking and people are saying all kinds of things, and that was too much exposure for me, for my young mind at the time. I also had to face I went through a lot of verbal abuse, living in an environment where my grandmother had already raised her own children, and now there's this other second wave. All of us know about COVID, and we know about the second wave, a second wave of children being brought for her to raise. So my grandmother was very verbal about everything, and sometimes she would utter things that were very damaging, to us. She would say, really tough things, to receive. And I just grew up being angry because the environment was very crazy, all the time. She would also always be complaining about something. Sometimes she would wake up in the morning and she would just have something that was not working out, and she would talk about it the whole day. Do you understand how damaging that could be? And now you have to be there with her and to listen through every one of her complaints, and she would shout at you. So there was a lot of verbal abuse going on. The other thing that we had to deal with was emotional abuse, where you'd be told, if you don't do this, we will do this, and at that time you were going through your own issues and no one really cared. So that caused a lot of damage within me as a person. And in fact, I think the one emotion that I've been constantly feeling until 2018 was anger. I've been angry my whole life. And for the first time in 2018, when I dealt with my anger, or I came face to face with my anger, I just looked back and I was like, wow, I don't remember any one time that I've not been angry, you know. And the other thing we also had to deal with was physical abuse. So like I said, there was an uncle of mine who was abusing drugs and was an alcoholic. And most of the time he would come home and just any slight reason, he would beat you up. He would, you know, just, you know, beat you, you know, and that was really hard. What I came to learn is that it affected me in a way that I used to think there was no room for mistakes. And this made me also, of course, have the same standard with other people. So it was difficult, you know. And the other thing is, I remember we were so poor that my grandmother tried to enroll me to Red Cross. I think there was a time Red Cross was giving food relief and, you know, even supplies for school to children. So my grandmother would wake me up in the morning, you know, take me to Red Cross, and all the time, I don't know what used to happen to my supplies because I never got them. I just used to go and sign up, but I never really got them. And, you know, just now that I'm a grown up and I look back and I remember the face my grandmother would put, you know, she would go there with me and say, we don't have food. And because she would even say I don't have parents, and she never wanted to explain where my parents were. I just remember how it was very difficult for her because, and of course you can imagine if it's difficult for her and then she's the one raising us, how that could potentially, you know, affect us, you know, as children. It was horrible. It was horrible. I remember I never really received anything from Red Cross, and we all know that quote that says hope deferred makes the heart sick. So every time I would come hoping that my things have come, you know, from Nairobi. We just used to be a place I used to hear, you know, and every time I would go and they would tell us not yet, and I would see the sadness on her face, and of course I would just know that there was nothing for me. And one of the things we had to also do, my grandmother, because we were very poor, somehow I don't know, I just used to go with my grandmother everywhere, and she would go with me to weddings, and not because I knew who was wedding, you know, who had the wedding, but because she wanted me to eat at the wedding so that when we come home we wouldn't need any food. So she would make sure she goes with all of us, including my cousins, to weddings, and then she would come with food and give us. She would go with us, basically wherever she was invited, whether it's a church meeting, whatever place that she would go to, she would invite each one of us to go with her so that we can eat. And it never really hit us, but again, I guess when we became grown-ups and we started sharing, then we realized, because we'd go home and then there was no food to be cooked, you know, maybe except for my grandfather, who would not go with my grandmother to the weddings. So it was really a tough childhood, and I think just sharing this video has made me remember many more memories that were not very good, and it was horrible. It feels as if it is happening right now. So my God, I remember I remember I used to steal when I was a child, and the reason why I used to steal is because I used to feel I didn't have much. So when I would see a person having much more than I did, the natural thing to do would just be to steal. And there were so many times I stole in school. I stole from my grandmother, I stole from different people around me because I didn't have, and I desired to just have, you know, and that was so difficult at the time. So I remember my mother would visit, especially on holidays in December, and I would call her Auntie Abby because I had other cousins of mine who were calling her Auntie Abby. And I remember another cousin of mine telling me, Winnie, this is your mother. You're supposed to call her mom or mama, but you shouldn't be calling her Auntie Abby. She's not your auntie, she's your mother. And of course, I didn't even know what to do with that. I didn't have a relationship with my mother at the time. I didn't have, it was very hard for me to call her, you know, mother, because I had never, you know, thought, I mean, she was different from me. I didn't know her. There was no connection with me to her, you know. So I'm just being told this is your mother, but I don't know her, you know. So calling her mother is very hard. And of course, I just stopped calling her Auntie Abby altogether. So I was not calling her anything because that was easier for me. So many times she came home, visited me, brought me stuff, and then she would go back to Nairobi. You know, all the time I was hoping she would go back to Nairobi with me, but every time she would go back without me. And what was happening in my heart, I used to think I was not worth of it. If your own mother can come home, look at you, and go back without you, you know, what kind of damage can that? You can imagine what kind of damage that can cause you. And for a very long time I felt like I hated her because she would come, leave me and go. So, but I still admired her. I looked at her, I used to admire her, the way she would speak, the way she was very calm, she was very, you know, open, very nice. And then so she was someone I really admired, but I couldn't get close to because I was afraid. And of course, because I came to understand, because I didn't have a relationship with her, that is why it was really hard for me. And for a very long time, she would just buy stuff for me. At least I had uniform to go to school. And I remember the very first time my mom got me school shoes, you know, from Bata. For the first time, I'm wearing Bata school shoes. And when they brought me the shoes, they were not fitting. They were smaller than my size. But I struggled to fit in my shoe because I just knew that when I tell them they don't fit, my mom said, if they don't fit, please return them and go and exchange them without wearing them. But because I did not believe in that, I knew that if I was going to be, I think I'd been disappointed in my life for so long that I knew that if I give them away, they'll never come back. So there was no trust in me at all. So I just wore the shoes, and they were, you know, they were tight. I couldn't walk in them properly. And I remember even my auntie who had brought me the shoes came and she was telling me, why don't you just say if they're not fitting? I couldn't. I mean, this is the first time I'm wearing better shoes, and it is hard for me, you know, to say they don't fit. So later what happened is my mom decided to take me, you know, to live with her at the time when I was in high school. And of course I came to live with my mother, but there was no connection whatsoever. So with her, you know, until her death, unfortunately. So, and we had not really discussed a lot of these things I'm sharing here, and it was really difficult. My dad at the time also was not in the country, and I used to idolize him. But I remember when I was in class 4, my father came, and of course I was just out there playing, and my father came, and I remember my uncle calling me and asking me, Winnie, do you know who this is? And of course I did not know who it was. I was like, no. And he's like, this is your father. And I was shocked. I'm like, oh, this is my father, okay. And I remember my father telling me that if you become number 1, I was in class 4 at the time, if you become number 1, I will buy you a bicycle. I mean, what would you like me to buy for you? And then I said, I want a bicycle, because at the time my peers had bicycles. I wanted a bicycle for myself. So I said, you buy me a bike. And my father unfortunately never came back. And I think that is how my trust with people just went out of the window. So I realized that when I became a grown-up, I had a difficult you know, time trusting people. Even if you tell me the things you want to tell me, it was hard for me to believe you, because my own father let me down. So how about what will other people out there do? And of course I came later to meet my dad again when I was in high school now. And in high school, I reached out to him, and he came to Nairobi, and he came to meet me, because at the time I was actually in Nairobi. And at least from that time on, we started, you know, working out on our relationship. It was not really easy, and it took us years to fix it. And it was really, really difficult at the time. So the relationship with my grandfather, on the other hand, was one of kind of a father-daughter, because I was kind of his favorite at the time. So when we were growing up, my grandfather would call me to eat with him. He would walk with me. You know, he kind of gave me a father-daughter experience that I never really had, because at the time my father was out of the country. So my grandfather used to teach me the things I know. He used to teach me even how to speak. He used to teach me, you know, the things that I used to do. And I remember there was a day I went through counseling, and the counselor was asking me, so why did you hold on for so long? And I didn't have an answer at the time. But with time, as I was thinking about it, the more I realized that actually my hope was, I used to have this dream for a better tomorrow. And of course, in the current moment, my grandfather used to make it worthwhile, because he would, yes, I had terrible days, but my grandfather would come home and would, you know, tell me things and be there for me. And then it made it, you know, easier. It made the load easier. It made the life much easier. And of course, sadly, my grandfather also died. And then my relationship with my father, of course, when I saw him in class 4, he never came back again until when I was in Form 2, and I decided to call him, you know. And when I called him now, he came and we started working out on our relationship. But it was not until 2018, 2018, that actually we were able to be restored, back with my father. Because when I met my father, I just realized that he was a good man. He was a good person, and I really loved spending time with him. And I really loved, because when I meet my father, we talk and talk and talk. I just love, to have him, as my father right now. We may not be able to redeem the time that he missed, but we can, redeem the time that we have right now. And that is what has happened to me. So, of course, later, when I became a grown-up, I realized that everything that I'd gone through as a child, and I've not even mentioned 10% of what I went through as a child, but I realized that everything I went through as a child actually affected me as a grown-up. So it was not until when I started dating that I realized I was actually messed up. When I started going to work, I realized that I was actually messed up. I couldn't relate with others on a healthy level. I couldn't relate with others on a on that level of having healthy relationships, because I'd come from a very dysfunctional background that it had affected me. And at that time, I remember the anger in me grew, and I was wondering, why would my parents abandon me? Why would my grandmother verbally abuse me? Why would my my childhood had affected me in the way that I looked at the world, basically. So I used to just feel I was angry, and I was weird, and I was different, and I was I had guts to do all the wrong things, and I remember in campus I started drinking because I just wanted to numb the pain. One thing I've realized about childhood trauma is that when you become a grown-up, it kind of affects you, because you kind of start you start realizing that you're different. You start meeting different people from different backgrounds, and then you realize there's something very strange about you, and then you kind of live with shame, guilt, and even insecurity. And when we all know that when you have insecurity, being in a relationship can be a bit challenging. And even going to the office and just meeting different people, you start treating everything as war, in your life. And that is exactly what happened to me. I started treating relationships as you have to kind of become abusive for you to show you love a person, because the people that had raised me, I knew they loved me, but they abused me, and I kind of thought that abuse was love. And if a person comes and they are just genuinely loving, I would reject them, because I thought these were boring. I thought they were weird and strange. And sometimes when I would sit with my friends and then they would say, we're doing this and this as a family, I used to find it very strange, because I used to think they're pretending, and they were very weird, because I knew that you have to hurt people you love, and you cannot. I did not know unity. I did not know oneness. Just peace. I think it's actually accurate for me to say that I used to thrive in chaos, and I would just love where there's chaos. And when I was in campus, I remember I just used to love where there is war, and run there and go and fight, and just show up, for the wrong things. And it was horrible. It was horrible. I think when I finished campus and when I went to the workplace for the first time, now I realized why I was the way I was. And I looked back and I realized that a lot of what had happened to my childhood was now pouring into my, adulthood. And I was very shocked and also very angry, of course. But so when I gave my life to Christ in 2018, I think that is the time God started showing me all the things that I'd gone through as a child and how exactly they had affected me. And then I started being curious. I started, listening to Joyce Meyer tell her own story. I started listening to other people's stories to understand what they had gone through and how it has affected them. I started, gaining interest in just reading psychological books. I started gaining interest in just telling God, show me, and I thank God because He took me through a process where I understood how exactly my childhood had affected me and how it had affected my relationships, how it had affected me as a person, and the picture I was giving out to the world, how it had affected my self-awareness, the things I had covered in my head so that I never have to think about them or go through them again. How I had felt ashamed all my life, guilty of some things that my family had done to me and they had done to the people around me, and even ashamed of the poverty, the background that I had, the things that I had done. And until I started reading the Word of God and understanding who God was to me, and understanding that He's the father to the fatherless, and understanding that He's the one who wipes away our tears. He's the one who deals with the deep things that I'd gone through. Let me tell you, I'd gone through so deep things that very deep things that I was not even aware of. you know, because one of the things I learned is that sometimes when you go through deep things, our brains kind of help you to forget about it, so that you don't have to deal with it. But they kind of come subconsciously from what you do. You know, I used to just be very chaotic, you know, as a person. I'm sure many people who knew me from high school to campus and a bit of after campus, they would attest to this. They would now understand what had happened to me, you know. And by the time even my mom was dying, I was out. I was empty. I lived a very empty life and a very chaotic life, and it had affected me. It had affected my relationship. It had affected how I looked at myself, you know, and had affected how I you know, how I took relationships, you know, just being in a relationship where you kind of feel you have to give of yourself and to give things for you to be accepted, you know. And this is the exact same relationship that I had even with the people around me, my family members, you know. It made me a people pleaser. I became, you know, I wanted to please people so they can accept me, you know. That only comes from a place of shame and, you know, guilt, you know. And I was trying to buy myself out of the shame and guilt I was feeling, you know, the insecurities, you know. And you know, just getting to a place where finally I did all the counseling sessions. Of course I had to also pick my counselors, because I had gone through some number of counseling and I had to drop out of some of them because I knew they were not working out for me. But I went and did some journeys. I had to spend time to do things, you know, just to help me to understand and to hear the story from other people's points of view, and to just relate to my own story, and to go through counseling, and to share, and to cry, and to pray, and to fast, and to, you know, I've had to do a number of things which were very necessary for my journey. Right now, of course, it looked like it was a lot of things, but right now, as I look back, I believe that it was worth it. I believe that everything that I went through and everything that I had to do to get out was worth it. So, and of course, I'm glad that by the time my grandmother was dying, we had discussed a bit of some of these things, and she also saw sense in them. And I've had to do uncomfortable conversations. I've had to do uncomfortable places, you know, just to go to uncomfortable places within myself that were not normal, you know. So from my story, I hope that you can learn that things happen to you, or happened to us when we were children, and these things affect us, you know. I love someone, I remember a quote that someone said, if you're born poor, it's not your mistake. If you die poor, it's your mistake. And it's the same thing I always tell myself. If all of us don't get to decide the kind of background we have, but you don't have, I'm here to encourage someone, you don't have to go through the same issues again and again and again and wonder what happened to you. You can always look back. Yes, as painful as it seems, you can always look back and deal with the issues that you were thrown your way. So I hope that you have the courage to look back and deal with the issues. There's everything you went through, whether it's a single parent home, it's parents who are abusive. You could have both parents, but they could be abusive. Because I remember there was a day I used to tell God, why did you allow me to be raised by my grandmother? And I realized that being raised by your grandmother is not the only way you can be. You can have childhood trauma. Some of you have been raised by both parents, but there was, of course, poverty sometimes, and maybe one parent was abusing the other, maybe physical abuse. Maybe there was one parent who was arrested. Maybe one parent was abusing the children, you know, and all those things are a perfect setup for a disaster in future, especially if you don't deal with it. So mine here is just to encourage you to seek healing, to seek that healing journey, because as much as you will go through life thinking you've won because maybe you got a good job and now you have some money, or you have good money, unfortunately money will never fix the things we feel internally. Of course it can pay for counseling services. So I hope that you have the courage to look back at your life, whether you were raped as a child, and I'm so sorry about that, whether you went through any kind of abuse, any kind of dysfunction, you know, in your own life, and that you're able to look back, and this time round just remember that you're no longer in that space, so that you can look back bravely and deal with it. Okay, one of the things I've had to do is just look back and remember everything that was done to me, of course so far, everything that was done to me so far, and it was the most difficult journey I've ever had to do. I know many people say it was very difficult for me to become the person I am. Mine, the most difficult thing was to look back and to forgive those who had wronged me, you know, and getting to a place where I can look back and say I made it. I can look back and say I am somewhere. I can look back and say I've healed. That was a miracle to me, and I'm so grateful to everyone who supported my journey, everyone who's supported my growth, everyone who supported me by giving me even honest, genuine feedback, you know. And of course they were giving me feedback with love, because it really helps when you have people who give you feedback with love. Yeah, but we must be willing to look back one more time and deal. We must be willing to look back at the things we went through and deal. We cannot go on covering, yeah, because this explains why we have so many mental health issues, you know, around us, because you went through a lot of things that were damaging, and now it's time for you to look back and deal with them. We cannot afford to go through life, you know, having triggers all the time and dealing with things that we have no idea even where they come from. So I hope that you'll have the courage to look back at your own life, and if you prefer to talk to someone, I hope that you have the courage to reach out to someone you trust, okay? And I hope that you have the courage to not run away anymore from the life that you've had to endure. So I hope that you've learned something from my own story. This was a very difficult one to share, but I hope that it will make someone realize that the things you went through were not normal, and it's okay if you want to deal with them right now. In fact, I recommend that you deal with them right now, so that you don't go through life, you know, angry or ashamed or guilty or even insecure, because these things do affect our relationships, they affect our work, they affect our growth on a personal level, they affect relationships with our friends, they affect everything about us. So I hope that you have the courage to look back this time around with the courage that you need to, so that you can do life the right way that you're supposed to. Obviously, the way God created us, we were supposed to have a normal, nice life, but things happened along the way that almost threatened the life out of us, and now we are here and we can look back and deal. So God bless you. Have a fantastic day. I hope that in the coming few weeks I'll be sharing how my childhood affected my relationships and my job and the different aspects of my life. So I hope that someone will be edified, someone will learn something from their own story and from this story. So thank you, and God bless you, and have a fantastic day.